Welcome to another episode of the Unanswered Maydays podcast. Today, we're going to be exploring the burn, bite, kill framework as related to wildland fire risk and structural firefighter risk and the upstream decisions that shape firefighters' survival. My name is Mike Jensen. I'm an associate professor with Washington State University Extension and a firefighter, a former suppressionist, former preventionist, focused in on wildfire mitigation as a solution to today's wildfire issues, and very much interested in what can burn, bite, and kill firefighters. So we'll get on with today's segment. Every firefighter remembers the sound of a Mayday, but some Maydays begin years before that radio call. Long before the engine arrives, long before smoke shows from the roof line, long before firefighters deploy a hose line into a structure or hike into a wind-driven wildland fire. Some Maydays begin in planning meetings, in zoning decisions, in land development policies, in building design, in infrastructure investments, in forest management decisions, in vegetation management, and in budget priorities. And increasingly, they begin where communities expand into fire-prone landscapes. So again, welcome to Unanswered Maydays. Today, we're going to be exploring the burn, bite, kill you framework through a much wider lens. Burn, bite, kill. Burn refers to the thermal insult, the fire behavior, the entrapment, and the rapidly changing fire conditions that firefighters respond to. Bite represents the toxic burden firefighters absorb over time, the smoke exposure, the carcinogens, the particulates, the diesel exhaust, the contaminated gear, the stress chemistry, and the cumulative occupational damage. Kill you represents the catastrophic outcomes that take firefighters' lives immediately or suddenly, such as collapse, burnover, vehicle incidents, cardiac events, aviation accidents, and operational system failures. But the conversation is not only about firefighters, it's about the upstream decisions that shape firefighters' risk before the alarm ever sounds. Because communities increasingly built in high-risk fire environments are also shaping firefighter exposure. And the difficult question is this: how do we help decision makers understand that their policies directly affect firefighter survivability? How do we help homeowners recognize that mitigation is not just about saving property, it's about reducing the likelihood that firefighters will be placed into unsurvivable conditions? And how do we shift the conversation from reactive response to upstream prevention? One of the most dangerous myths in the fire service is that tragedy happens suddenly. The reality is that most firefighter deaths are predictable patterns. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, has repeatedly found recurring themes in firefighter line of duty deaths: inadequate situational awareness, communication failures, staffing shortages, command breakdowns, fatigue, insufficient training, and lack of accountability systems. These aren't random events. These are systems problems. And many of these problems start upstream long before a structure fire. We ask firefighters to perform at elite levels in increasingly hostile environments, while departments across the country face recruitment shortages, retention failures, aging workforces, mandatory overtime, reduced recovery time, increasing call volumes, and expanding EMS demands. Firefighters are often chronically sleep deprived before they ever arrive on the scene. Research from the Harvard Work Hours Health and Safety Group and studies published through the International Association of Firefighters have shown that sleep disruption significantly increases cognitive impairment, reaction time delays, cardiovascular risk, and operational failure. And then when we layer in firefighter culture, the culture of invulnerability, the culture that says exhaustion is weakness, that contamination is part of the job, that mental health struggles are personal failures, that aggressive interior attack always equals courage. Those beliefs can quietly normalize risk accumulation. That's an important phrase, risk accumulation. Most firefighter deaths are not isolated mistakes. They are accumulated exposure, accumulated fatigue, accumulated carcinogens, accumulated stress, accumulated normalization of deviance, and eventually the bill comes due. Sociologist Diane Vaughan coined the term normalization of deviance after studying the Challenger disaster. The concept applies directly to the fire service as well. When dangerous practices become routine because catastrophic outcomes do not happen immediately, organizations begin accepting abnormal risk as normal. Examples include operating with understaffed companies, delayed decontamination, inconsistent air monitoring, poor rehab compliance, freelancing, incomplete Mayday training, and tolerating chronic exhaustion. Over time, these conditions stop feeling dangerous because they become familiar until somebody transmits a Mayday, or develops aggressive cancer at age 42, or suffers a cardiac event after years of cumulative stress, or walks away psychologically injured. The Mayday often begins upstream. When most people think about firefighter danger, they picture flames, and flames matter. But increasingly, the danger is shaped by where and how we build communities. Across the United States, especially in the wildland-urban interface, often called the WUI, communities continue expanding into fire-prone areas. Forested slopes, canyons, wind corridors, drought-stressed vegetation zones, remote developments with limited ingress and egress. And every one of those decisions has operational consequences for firefighters. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, the U.S. Forest Service, FEMA, and multiple wildfire commissions have reportedly warned that land use planning is now a central fire safety issue. Wildfire is no longer just a forestry problem. It's now a community design problem, and we're seeing this across the country. We often talk about wildfire as though it's purely natural, but modern wildfire disasters are increasingly the result of intersecting systems, climate conditions, fuel loading, historical suppression practices, development patterns, infrastructure vulnerability, and population growth into high-risk areas. The exposure footprint keeps growing. And when communities are designed without fire resilience in mind, firefighters inherit the risk. Narrow roads, limited evacuation routes, combustible landscaping, wood fencing connected directly to homes, unscreened vents, inadequate water systems, dense housing spacing. All of these factors can transform a manageable fire into a mass casualty risk environment. The burn, bite, kill you framework becomes larger here. Burn is not only about direct flame contact. It's about firefighters operating in environments where fire intensity exceeds the design limits of the community itself. UL Fire Safety Research Institute studies and NIST research have shown how quickly modern fuel packages create extreme heat release rates. Wildland fire behavior research has also demonstrated how ember storms can ignite entire neighborhoods far ahead of the main fire front. That means firefighters are increasingly fighting structure fires and wildland fires simultaneously. And then we confront the difficult upstream questions. Should communities continue approving development patterns that require firefighters to assume extreme operational risk during predictable fire events? This is not an anti-development question. It is a responsibility question. Historically, planning and zoning conversations often separated land development from emergency response realities. But today, resilience planning must include evacuation analysis, defensible space requirements, road width standards, vegetation setbacks, ignition-resistant building materials, water infrastructures, and long-term fire behavior modeling. Those are not optional considerations anymore in the planning arena. And homeowners matter too. Research from the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety and wildfire mitigation programs consistently show that home survivability is strongly influenced by relatively achievable mitigation actions. It's the small things. Things like ember-resistant vents, Class A roofing, clearing debris from gutters, removing combustible material near structures, replacing flammable fencing attachments, and maintaining defensible space. 1. Every mitigated structure changes the operational environment for firefighters. Every hardened home reduces exposure. Every improved evacuation route reduces entrapment potential. Every defensible space project can reduce intensity and increase survivability. The fire service alone cannot solve a community planning problem. but firefighters often become the final barrier between upstream policy failures and downstream tragedy. The second component of the framework may be the most underestimated, the bite. Not immediate trauma, not collapse, not flame, but toxic exposure, the slow injury. Cancer has become one of the defining occupational threats in the fire service. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, part of the World Health Organization, classified occupational exposure as a firefighter as carcinogenic to humans. That is a Group 1 carcinogen designation. The same category used for benzene, asbestos, and tobacco smoke. Firefighters encounter benzene, formaldehyde, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PFAS compounds, heavy metals, diesel exhaust, and ultrafine particulates. These exposures during the fire attack overhaul, gear handling, station contamination, and apparatus emissions add to an exposure that is cumulative. What is striking is that many of the highest risk exposures historically occurred after visible fire suppression. Removing SCBA during overhauls, sitting in contaminated gear, dirty apparatus cabs, and contaminated station furniture, and improper laundering all add to the accumulated risk. For years, contamination became normalized. Dirty gear was even treated as a badge of honor. The culture is changing, but unevenly. Some departments now emphasize mitigation efforts such as gross decon right on the scene, second set of gear, extractor use, clean cab concepts, diesel exhaust capture systems, and utilize annual physicals and cancer screening programs for all members. Others still struggle because of funding limitations, staffing shortages, or cultural resistance. And there's another upstream issue here: the invisible nature of exposure. Firefighters can see the flames, they can hear the collapse, but cancer develops quietly over years. That makes prevention psychologically harder. Especially in a profession built around immediate action. The danger is delayed, the consequences are delayed, the reinforcement for risky behavior is immediate. A firefighter who removes their mask during overhaul may feel fine today. The injury emerges years later. This is where upstream leadership matters. Departments that reduce exposure effectively tend to have a strong safety culture, consistent enforcement, access to health monitoring, transparent reporting, and leadership willing to confront uncomfortable truths. And firefighters are increasingly recognizing that survivability includes long-term survivability, not just making it out of the building today, but being alive for retirement, being present for a family, avoiding aggressive occupational cancers. The Mayday can happen 20 years after the fire. That changes how we should define operational success. The third component is kill. These are the catastrophic events that immediately end careers or lives: collapse, vehicle incidents, entrapment, cardiac death, explosions, violence, training accidents. Cardiac events remain one of the leading causes of firefighter line of duty death in the United States. The reality surprises many people outside the profession, but when you look at the physiology, it makes sense. Firefighters experience extreme heat stress, intense sympathetic nervous system activation, sleep disruption, dehydration, heavy exertion, particulate inhalation, and chronic cortisol elevation. Over years, those factors compound. And again, upstream issues emerge. Departments with limited staffing often force mandatory overtime. Recovery becomes inadequate, exercise time disappears, nutritional habits deteriorate, and stress accumulates. Then there's the psychological side. The fire service has historically struggled to address PTSD, depression, substance misuse, suicide, cumulative trauma, and moral injury. Repeated exposure to death, violence, pediatric incidents, and human suffering changes people neurologically and emotionally. Yet many firefighters still fear the stigma and inability to easily seek help. That stigma is itself an upstream hazard. The First Responder Center for Excellence and multiple behavioral health studies have shown elevated suicide risk and psychological stress among firefighters and EMS personnel. Mental health is not separate from operational readiness. It is truly operational readiness. And then there's training realism. Some departments conduct excellent Mayday training repeatedly under realistic conditions. Others rarely have the opportunity to practice it. Yet, cognitive performance under stress depends heavily on repetition and familiarity. You don't rise to the occasion, you default to your level of training. That phrase exists for a reason. When firefighters become trapped, disoriented, low on air, or injured, fine motor skills degrade rapidly. Without repetitive survival training, panic can often overtake the individual. So, upstream prevention means more than tactical instruction. It means building resilient systems, staffing, accountability, behavioral health support, modern training, fitness standards, sleep management, exposure reduction, and psychologically safe leadership cultures. Because no firefighter should carry the entire burden of survivability alone. The organization matters. The burn, bite, kill you framework forces us to confront a difficult truth. Firefighter survivability is not determined only on the fire ground. It is shaped upstream by planning, by zoning, by budgeting, by leadership, by mitigation, by culture, by policy, by education. And increasingly, communities themselves become part of the firefighter risk exposure. Every decision to ignore defensible space, every approval of vulnerable infrastructure, every subdivision built with inadequate evacuation capacity, every refusal to modernize codes, every failure to address fuel conditions, those decisions eventually arrive on the fire ground, and firefighters inherit the consequences. But this conversation is not about blame. It's about shared responsibility, because resilient communities reduce civilian loss and firefighter exposure at the same time. Decision makers need to understand that resilience is not an abstract policy language. It is truly firefighter survival. Homeowners need to understand that mitigation is not cosmetic landscaping. It may very well determine whether firefighters can safely defend a structure. The future of fire safety will require stronger partnerships between fire departments and planners, elected officials, developers, insurers, emergency managers, foresters, homeowners, and the community. Because no single system can solve this very large problem alone. The unanswered Mayday is often the one no one recognized early enough. The policy warning ignored, the mitigation deferred, the staffing shortage normalized, the exhausted firefighter, the untreated trauma, the community built for aesthetics instead of survivability. The fire service has never lacked courage. The challenge now is whether communities can build systems worthy of the people asked to protect them. This has been the Unanswered Maydays. I ask that everyone stay aware, stay resilient, and take care of each other. And let me share one of my personal mantras. May the mitigated forest be with you. Thank you.